Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I am your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had a conversation about the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's S-E-E, changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 57 with the title Creating Balance and Representation in Technology. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome Nicole Hardiman. Nicole describes herself as a software and data engineer who is passionate about inclusion and diversity, and one of the co-founders of the Swindon Inclusion and Diversity Network. When I asked Nicole to describe her superpower, she said, "People talk to me." And she's been told that she has a listening ear. Hello, Nicole. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yes, I think we planned this months ago and it's finally got to that time. So thank you so much. Nicole, creating balance and representation in technology. I know you're passionate about this, so tell me more about your passion.
So I've been working in technology for a really long time. And if you want to know exactly how long that is, I was absolutely on call for the Millennium Bug. So quite a while. And in that time, I've I've been quite a lonely lady, shall we say. There's not been a lot of females in the tech teams that I've been in. So I can remember absolutely working in one place where it wasn't just that I was the only tech person, the only female in a tech team, or the only female on that floor. I was the only female in the building other than the receptionist. And at the time, it didn't occur to me to mind about that. It didn't cross my mind to be concerned or worried. But as time has gone on, and the more I've spoken to other ladies, the more I realised that sometimes women in technology feel extremely lonely. They feel extremely isolated, and they don't always have as much of a voice as they would like to have. They feel a little drowned out. So it's really important for me to make sure that people who are underrepresented in technology have a voice, because around half of our population is female, so our tech team should be representative of the population at large. Otherwise, we do end up with some, well, there have been some quite well documented faux pas. Let's go with that.
Yes, and we can cover those in a minute if you like. So why? I mean, I hear this all the time. I work with a lot of recruiters, so my kind of sweet spot is advising recruiters. And I hear so many times it's really, really hard to find great female talent. And really, is it?
There is a very small pool of female talent, and I think that as an industry, the technology industry is actually starting to look in the wrong place for that female talent. There's a lot of, I need some really brilliant software engineers. I need them now. I need them all to be very senior, and they should be female because I've got an I&D quota to hit. I really don't like that we've got an I&D quota to hit. That's terrible. Let's come back to that one in a bit. But the pool of ladies that are out there who are that senior is really small. It's a statistic, and I think it was the Women in Technology website actually came up with there's less than 10% of women are full stack devs. So for your developers that are doing full stack development, only 10% of those people are female, let alone as identify as anything else. I think those numbers are ridiculously small. So if we're all trying to fish from the same pond, and there's only 10% of that pond is female, then we're not going to attract all of that talent unless we've got something really special going on and we're really making sure that we're looking after the ladies that we've got. I think what we need to be doing is saying, do you know what, tech's for everybody, and we need to demystify it. We need to say that it's not just for people who can code in 6 languages and understand 4 databases and know how to export everything into the cloud and can then splice data here, there, and everywhere. It's for anybody who wants to do anything, and it's a really creative process. And I don't think we talk about it in the right way to encourage more ladies to think about that as a career. I often talk about my niece. So complicated family, didn't meet my niece until she was about 7. And she said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "I work with computers." And she said to me, "Can girls do that?" And I said, girls can do anything they want to do. If you want to work with computers, that's fine. She's the only girl in her scout troop right now. So I am super proud of her. That's amazing. But if one conversation that says girls can do anything can encourage my niece to do that, what could that do in a school? What happens if we go into school and say, do you know what? This isn't really heavily nerdy stuff that's really frightening, and if we've turned it into something that only a subset of the population can do. What if we go in and say, this is really creative. Look at the art that you can create with technology. Look at what you could build. What if you wanted to do something? And I'm going to be horribly stereotypical, and I know a lot of the schools are. But what if you wanted to do something with textiles, but then you added some automation to that or some robotics into it and turned it into something completely different? And I don't think we give that opportunity. We just say, right, this is for people who stare at screens and numbers and text all day, and these are things that you might want to do that's more creative. I mean, I have a Raspberry Pi, and my Raspberry Pi goes in the craft cupboard next to my cross stitch because in my mind, those two things are both creative things. They belong together. But I think it's not a lot of people that think like that. So I think getting into the
I've had,
schools.
I think, 3 Raspberry Pis over the. I don't. I haven't. I think I got the first one when it first came out, and then I got the next one that had a bit more graphics memory, and I would I would spend hours downloading the image and tweaking it and working out what was going to be part of the build and booting it up and seeing what I could do with the thing. I don't think I ever programmed with it, but I used it more as a to display some graphics and things like that. I was using some tools. I think I wanted a media server. That's what it was at the time. I was using I can't even know, before Plex, whatever that. Yeah, there's a media server you could download, and so I think I built that on it. There was a built for Pi because it had a very good graphics chip, and even though it was only a Celeron processor, it was the graphics chip that could render 1080p and DVDs and things like that. So yeah,
All
I
sorts
remember
of
that
magical
back in.
things with it.
Yeah,
One of the guys I work with has put a Kubernetes cluster on it, which I think is fantastic. It's a Raspberry Pi.
yeah, and I've seen people using them in basic forms to run sort of the TV and reception areas of buildings, and you can connect to them, and you can put an image on it. And I think I paid about £37, if I remember rightly, for the first one. And for better technology, okay, you didn't spend another £100 on the box, the keyboard, all the other interfaces, but it was still great value just to play with.
My current favourite thing is the £8.99 camera unit that I've got. I'm hoping to do some time lapse photography of my garden. So
Hmm.
we will see. But it's like I said, creative. I think it's creative.
Yeah, I love playing with it, and but then I've always been, probably like yourself, quite geeky for all of my life. And is that part of the problem that we give it that label of geeky, we
Mm.
give it that label of nerdy, uh, Bill and Ted type thing? It's kind of got that it doesn't have even the image of men who are into the subject isn't, they're not attractive men is a stereotype, is it? They're kind of baggy t-shirt with skulls on it and long hair and kept in the dark. So even the male
Yeah.
stereotypes is not attractive, let alone how we get women to believe that that's a career path.
I think there's a really interesting TV advert, and I can't remember which channel it's on, but there's a TV program that's being pushed at the moment called Beauty and the Geek, where I think certain ladies who might appear to be fairly shallow in the adverts, at least, I don't want to make an assumption about them, and they've sort of paired them up with guys who have been in the tech market and are obviously a little bit well off, and they've decided this is a dating show. And I was like, you're not helping me because you've created this persona of the Big Bang Theory type
Hmm.
guys who can't sort of hold a social conversation, and that's not true. That's not what technology is about at all. I mean, more and more as technology moves forward, we're doing things like agile, which is a way of working which is really collaborative, and you have to be able to be very social in those situations. It's not shut
Hmm.
somebody in a cupboard anymore and let them program for hours and hours and hours. It's now, how do we do this together? And I think the more that's happening, as long as we can give people a voice and include people, then that's a really great place to be, and it actually opens a lot of doors. But it's not something that people look at in that way.
So is the challenge the inclusion element of or is it the creating aspirations for young women, young girls to see it as a career? If they were to get to the point where they had an interest, would they be included? But how do we get the interest there?
I think it's both. I really think there's a huge thing about demystifying tech. I will give you another family story. My older sister is a seamstress, and she runs in her where she does her sewing. I don't know what you call that. So group of people doing a load of sewing and upholstering and all the rest of it. She has a work board, so a big whiteboard that has post-its on it that has work to do, work in progress, work that's blocked, and then it tells you who's doing the work. And I said to her, "You're just running a Kanban." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's basically a Kanban board. That's what you're doing. It's one of the principles of Agile. You could go and be a Scrum Master or something." And she went, "No, no, no, I can't do that. That's techie." I was like, "No, you don't understand. You're already doing it. This is it. This is the job." And that she was like, "No, no, can't do it. It's techie." And point blank refused to even look at it because that was a technology thing. Because I think we have created something so closed in, so ivory tower that people can't bring themselves to look at it anymore because it's frightening. So how do we make that less frightening? And it's something that it does start in the schools, because we are schools that don't have a great STEM or don't have great numbers of ladies or girls moving into STEM also tend to have some really large numbers of ladies and no guys in things like home economics. So how are we taking those, really early stereotypes and breaking them and saying this isn't scary, this is okay, this is something we can, work on together, and the things that I as a woman bring to that, or somebody else as a guy, or however somebody else identifies brings to that, is all going to be something different, and all of our experiences are really valid, and we'll all approach problems in a different way. So bringing the wealth of diversity of thought, or even let alone diversity of whatever we want to call ourselves, is really, really, really important. So it's how we break that, and I think it's really hard. I recently was working on a white paper with the Tech Talent Charter. It's in a hackathon to create a white paper, which was a good job. If anybody wants to have a go at that, they quite often have them on their website. When we talked through that, we were saying you actually have to go after people to talk to them about reskilling in technology. You can't do it passively. They can't come to you because it's too frightening. So how do you go to them and say, are you really good at problem solving? Are you really good at understanding this flow of work? Are you really good at, even are you great at spreadsheets? Because often it's not a big leap then to go out a little bit more and actually think about a tech job. Some of these people are already doing it, but they're so scared of admitting that that's technology because that's frightening. I mean, previous role, I used to work for the National Trust, and we used to talk about tech-phobic people because the National Trust has a lot of volunteers. And we'd quite often say that some of the folks there were tech-phobic, so you'd need to approach the problems with them in a different way. And I'm scared that we are creating generations of people who are still tech-phobic.
Yeah, because we try and, as you say, we mystify it and layer it in acronyms and cliquey kind of words, and we paint the picture. If you look on films and things, the person that's trying to defuse the bomb is kind of geeky, or the person trying to hack the world or break into the mainframe is portrayed as it being really complex. And if you're in tech world, you know that everything they show on the screen is completely made up and no, you can't do it that way. You can't just push a button and connect the entire system and hack into stuff. But I was just thinking back as you're talking there. We go back to Ada Lovelace. Who was arguably was the first computer programmer. Very instrumental. Even a programming language was named after Ada. And I when I was in my early career, I learned Ada, which is very similar to Pascal. If you've ever done Pascal. And it was completely alien to me at the time. It was because we were doing embedded systems into chips and blowing EPROMs at the time, and Ada was used as the cross compiler to generate the machine code and everything to put into these flight systems. And then I was also thinking about the movie that came out 4 or 5 years ago called Hidden Figures, about the black women who took part in the American space program, didn't they? And in those days, it was typing. Typing was a woman's job. So the original data processors, the original computer operators were all women, and therefore, and a lot of the mathematical calculations were performed by women. And we can see classic examples. If you go back even further here, we look at Bletchley, we look at what happened to the code breakers during the war, how the government attracted people by using cryptography type adverts in the evening news or the papers around crosswords and puzzles to get these people in. And of course, the men were off fighting and on the front. Women were the people who were left to hold the fort, and they were allowed to shine, and they were allowed to be intelligent and be clever and show their skills. So somehow along the line, this woman's work, women's job, got usurped by men. I don't know, maybe in the mid 80s, maybe, because I've got friends that I went to school with. One was a Kix developer at IBM Hersley who became a master inventor and had numerous patents registered under her name. And she's now a visiting professor at Sheffield University.
Wow.
And she is right in the middle of this software data programming. And very influential, certainly in IBM and some of the work she's been doing. She collaborates on open source now and does a lot of projects across the world. So when did it become not a female subject? When was that, in the 80s or was it before?
I think it's fascinating. I think in the 80s, I think we definitely didn't have. Well, we didn't. I was going to try and sort of sugarcoat it then, but I'm not going to. We did not have an inclusive culture in the 80s. Let's just be flat. And I think it was really difficult then. I mean, even in the 90s when I started, it wasn't really seen as a thing. I have been in the meetings where somebody has suggested I take the notes because I'm the female, or can I get them a coffee, please? No, I'm not going to put up with that. But that's my personality type, and I will tell somebody to go and get lost. Maybe not in those words. But I was talking to somebody recently who'd had something very clumsy said to them, something well-meaning but very clumsy, and it's just even the language becomes very uninclusive. Let's go with that. But from where it came from, I think it must have been around the 70s or the 80s where everything was extremely powerful. It was extremely heavy going. There was, very Wolf of Wall Street kind of stuff, and everybody was dressing in power suits with shoulder pads and ridiculous
The
things.
shirts with the white collar and the sort of
That's
striped
the
shirts, or the banker shirt. Yeah, I remember those. Yeah.
And I think it just became a really toxic place to be because everybody was competing, and it's not a comfortable place. And if that's somewhere you're really not comfortable being, then I think it's something we sort of took a step back from. But no, I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but it definitely did. Listening to ladies now talk to me about why they might want to leave technology, it's often about competition and one-upmanship and trying to put people down to get ahead. And I think the 80s was very much that.
Is there still a situation for younger women, and probably in their teens and 20s, where they can't necessarily invest the same sort of time a man can because of the family commitments, because of the home expectations, if they want to have a relationship and a family? They tend to be the default when it comes to the home admin, doesn't it? So when you're trying, I mean, I remember when I was developing my IT career that I'd lock myself away for hours and suddenly realised it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd be in work until I got kicked out by the security people at midnight or whatever. And I think that sometimes it sort of sucks you in, the technology, because it's always there. You can always do more. Do you think that plays a factor? Is it availability of time?
I think it definitely does. I think there's something really key there actually, because I think, and we've seen it through the pandemic, where our engineers, and I'm not going to say all of them because I think that we are becoming a more progressive society, and I think there's a lot of people who are doing their fair share of the childcare and all the rest of it. I've certainly had one-to-ones with engineers that I look after. One of the guys, we had a one-to-one with his 5-year-old sat on his lap, and that was fine. we managed. I talked to this young lad about his rock quite a lot before I managed to speak to his dad about his programming, but that was all right. But for the most part, it's been the ladies that have had to bear the brunt of that childcare and the homeschooling
Mm.
and all of the rest of it. And I have conversations with them. So I look after other engineers now at this point in my career. That's what I do. And I spoke to a lady who also does that. And she said, well, I wanted to move more into management because I just couldn't keep up with the tech anymore. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, I don't have time in my life to be able to do all of the things that the guys can. And she said that straight to me. So I was like, why I hadn't really thought about it that way before. Because if you look at where there are larger numbers of ladies in technology at the moment, it's those very junior levels where we've put some work into the grassroots and put some work into school, and people are starting to come through the system now.
Mm.
But as soon as you get to like a mid-level developer, they become invisible. They go away. They disappear. And I hear people talking about things like, they went on maternity and they didn't want to come back into a technical job because technology moves so fast, they haven't been able to keep up. And now they were a year behind because they've taken time out to have a family, which, as employers, we need to look at to make sure that that's something that we can help people with. Because,
Mm.
with the right buddy system, with the right access to training, with the right, availability of having some actual time in your day job to say, right, we know you've had a year off. These are the things that we've moved forward with. This is some training you can do. We're going to give you time to get back up to speed because they're brilliant people and they really understand the foundations of it. I mean, having a baby doesn't make you not a technologist, which is, and people are leaving the industry because they really feel they can't keep up, which is terrible. So we end up with fewer and fewer senior technical ladies, which is really difficult because those senior decisions are then made completely by guys, and we end up with things like I think the iPhone thing was fairly well documented, where the design teams had basically created a phone that was the right size for a man's hand, but a lady they were finding women drop them more often. So yeah, things like that, or I've seen things where color schemes have been put in, and they're saying this pink stuff is for women. And I think, gosh, if you'd have had one woman on your tech team, somebody would have said, "Oh, that's a great idea." Um, so and we're missing that. We're missing the way that we navigate things differently. I've read a study recently saying that we navigate websites in different ways. So if that's the case, then the navigation is only being put in by guys because they're the only senior engineers that are around. So how do we change that up and make sure that everybody's represented and that we can work in a way that works for everyone and not just, copying the same demographic as the tech teams because they tend to be
Mm.
middle class, middle aged white guys.
And that is definitely, I mean, you're pointing out there the UX, the user interface. You're right that there seems to be a very structured, standard approach to things, and that it's not only a male female thing. There's a neurodiversity thing. There's a dyslexia thing. There's a
Absolutely.
colorblind thing. There's accessibility, dexterity, hands. So if it's thinking in a very monologue sort of way, we're not seeing the needs of others. So by at least recognizing that you need different voices, different views, different opinions, you're going to get a better product that's more relevant to the end
Mm.
user, the person trying to engage with it, aren't you?
And I think the way of thinking, I mean, we had an engineer recently, not female, a guy, but he'd come from a different background. So most of my engineers will come up through computer science. They'll do a very standard degree. They'll go through a very standard route into where they're going. And the engineer that I'm talking about, he'd come up and he was a bricklayer, and he'd gone from being a brickie to being a techie. And he's brilliant, really, really, really good. But he approaches every single problem in a completely different way to all of my techies because he just didn't come up that route. So he's not constrained by some of the things that the others would be. He's not but we've always done it like that because he's never seen it like that. So he's just going to do it the way that makes sense to him, which was brilliant. And I really loved that approach. Having people from different backgrounds, from different, like say, different neurodiversity status. And if you come in with a different life experience and you bring something different to that team that enables you to work as a team differently. And for me, my experience, it becomes richer, and you've got more because of the visibility that you have. You've got more likelihood of making something that's a brilliant product. So
Mm.
organizations are missing out. But again, the people that they're looking to grab are such a small pool that they need to start really early in schools to start encouraging people and demystifying this technology, to say, do you know what, you can come and do this because what you bring to the table is super valuable. And I don't think we do that.
Do you think schools are starting to focus on this? I mean, I don't think in 2022, with all the what I know about schools and their new initiatives around the kind of degendering the experience, do you see that schools are influencing younger generations of STEM and tech people?
I think they're trying to, but I think I read something really recently about Jordan, the country, having better laws around homosexuality than the UK did 20 years before we legalised and made everything more sensible. Um, but in reality, as a gay person in Jordan, then there was more of a likelihood of you being harassed by the police because, despite what the law said, the cultural and the societal norms still didn't agree. And I think we're a little bit, I mean, that's a really extreme example, but I think that's a little bit where we are with school. There is you will, not genderize subjects, and therefore you'll allow all the students to go and do whatever it is that they want to do. But we're still in a society that's going to say, do you know what, little girl, you shouldn't be playing with that action man, you should have this dolly. And it's something that's really built into us, and it's going to take a long time to
Mm.
come back from there.
I often we talk about having antenatal classes, and I I would like to see pre-parenting classes where parents are actually kind of encouraged to think in a gender neutral way about the
Mm.
aspirations they're setting for their children. I'm not talking about trans, non-binary, LGBTQ plus stuff here. I'm just trying to say, let's try and create this aspirational level playing field, or boost aspirations of young girls to have more belief that they can be who they want to be and what that might mean. Because I think we are still spoon feeding our children the blue and pink,
Mm.
the girl and boy stuff, gender
Yes.
reveal parties, the toys, everything
Oh
we're doing.
gosh.
Everything we're
Yes.
doing is promoting and propagating the gender stereotyping. And we know that by the time you get to 7, 8, 9, 10, those stereotypes are almost locked in to the child's vision of their future. And it takes a very forward looking set of parenting to really fight against the world. And we've only recently seen in the last 3 or 4 years Disney, Pixar producing content that is creating aspiration for young girls and young women. We're still seeing stereotyping women in movies behaving like men, but with tight pants on for the benefit of the men. So it's still sexualizing. And someone told me once that I never thought of this before, but the film Bugsy Malone, I don't even remember Bugsy Malone with the splurge guns. It was like kids playing gangsters. And they really rejected that film because what it was doing is it was sexualizing young teenage girls to be hanging off the shoulder of a young man, sort of thing. And I thought, wow, that's so insightful. So we're coding these messages into the young people's heads from very early age. This is your role. This is your role. And that's kind of, we've got to take responsibility for sort of kind of bringing that out of the system, haven't we?
Yeah, and it's really difficult. I mean, I love what you're saying about the Disney stuff. I mean, I know nobody can see behind me at the moment, but behind my head there are three Disney princesses, and they're the modern ones. So they are about, breaking tradition and moving forward with your own
Mm.
thoughts and working hard and achieving things rather than waiting for somebody to come and save you. And I think,
Yeah, the
the
Snow White,
narrative is
Sleeping
changing.
Beauty. Yeah.
Yeah, the narrative's definitely changing. I think it's really important to make sure that we're doing that with our young people. But you know, it's so ingrained because grandma's still gonna buy dollies for the little one. When I was a kid, my mum, until I was about 7, my mum refused to buy me trousers, So at which point I didn't care. I used to go and climb trees in my skirt and get in terrible trouble. But there's a real sort of difference between me and my sister. So once I was in my trousers, I was allowed to have a computer because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play games. My sister was brought up with lots of dollies and she had a pram. My sister's got a large amount of children, which means I don't have to have any. Which, that works for us. That's what makes her happy. This is what makes me happy. But it's a real difference, and even my own upbringing, I can see that sort of change because I can't even imagine doing what she does. I mean, that takes a level of strength and emotional fortitude that I probably don't have. But she's great at that, and she thinks what I do is some kind of black magic. So I think it's something we need to just, again, there are those weird barriers, aren't there? We need to break it down.
Yeah, there's so many women in their 20s, 30s, and even early 40s who almost feel apologetic for not wanting to have children for whatever reason that may be. And it seems almost like you're failing as a woman to not do your part. And I've met many women who constantly have that microaggression of having to explain themselves all the time. I don't want them. It's not that I'm gay. It's not that I haven't found somebody. I just don't want children, if that's okay with you. And yeah,
it creates a real strange reaction with people. Actually, I went on a work conference and I ended up flying home on the same plane with a customer, and we talked about techie stuff. We talked about geospatial design software that avoid clashing in factories. Very boring. And on the way home on the plane, because it was in Vegas, which sounds really really lovely, but it was really not because it was very customer focused, and I didn't think I did anything fun. But we were flying home and he was talking to me and we were talking about things. And I was like, oh, I don't want kids. And he just almost blanked me at that point. How could you be so selfish? What a terrible thing to do. That's really awful. And I said, no. Selfish would be having them when I didn't want them. I'm not having kids. I'm not being selfish. I'm just, who's going to look after you when you're older? I was like, well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I don't know. But he was absolutely horrified that I would not want kids. And I'd never had that kind of reaction from someone before.
but that's repeated time and time again. There's this expectation, isn't there? Yeah. Why aren't you engaged? When's the wedding? When are you going to? Yes, and it plays out time and time again.
It really does. I mean, when we got married, that was one of the first things. When are you having the babies? Like, what if we don't?
I will admit to our daughter got married last year, and my wife and I were quite excited about the fact that they're planning a family that is on their radar. But we didn't say you must. We were very conscious about the fact we didn't want to put any pressure on. We understood the risks that people go through and the emotional stress of it being difficult, whatever it may be. So we were very conscious about the fact that we didn't want to sort of seed that idea. But we said, is it okay to talk about the fact that you're thinking about having a family openly? And they went, yeah, please, we want to talk about it. So we certainly didn't want to put pressure on. And I've worked in environments where there was a sweepstake on a woman who just got married about how soon she was going to leave to have a baby.
Oh gosh,
And
no.
people had a sweepstake on it. And people were quoting from anything between 3 months to a year before she became pregnant. And I remember it being very open, but not obviously publicly open, but men would generally talk about it. It wasn't. So if I'm aware of that, it must happen more often than not. I think also about. I mean, I gender transitioned 5-6 years ago now. I forget when, and I've noticed myself that I've dumbed myself down, not to appear too clever in certain situations. So I'm a professional speaker. I travel the world with laptops and cables and AV kit, and I'm pretty. I ran an IT company for 30 years. I'm pretty technically competent in terms of self-sufficient. But I find I turn up to some venues. It's just easier for me to go, oh, can someone help me plug this in because I'm not sure what I'm doing, sort of thing. Because there's people there to deal with all that, and I don't know why. Am I playing the stereotype? Am I just taking advantage of the help that's there? I don't know, but sometimes I feel like just saying, "Look, come on, let me deal with it. You're making a hash of it. I could do this better than you can." But I just go, "Oh, come on, you do it then."
I've done that myself. I have done. I remember. I think we got new monitors in work some time ago. Might not even been this work. I can't even remember where it was. And the new monitor came with a USB-C connection, and I was thinking, well, no, what have I got here? Where's my HDMI cable? I need to plug all of this in, and I hadn't really thought about it. And I obviously hadn't had enough coffee that day. And somebody said to me, well, "Give it here, let me do it." And I said, "Fine, I shall be a princess then, and just stand over here," and made a big deal out of it and made him feel really awkward, which probably wasn't the best way to deal with it. But also, just take it, make it go away, make it sort it out. Which is, I probably am more techie than he was. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very
Or
weird
maybe
thing.
maybe it's just a realization that I'm there to do this job, not to
Mm,
do that job. And maybe it was just a realization that you're paid to worry about the technical stuff. I'm paid to speak and inspire. So maybe I should just do what I do best and let you do what you do best, so I don't absorb the stress of the whole thing. Maybe that's what it was.
maybe it was a really interesting thing. I listened to I think it was a Radio 4 podcast. I can't remember. But there was Candola is the guy's surname. I can't remember his first name, but he does a lot of it on inclusion and diversity. And he was talking about organisations that get their gender balance right at a senior management level. So if you do end up with 50-50 or 48-48 and 4 or whatever that happens to
Some
be.
non-binary people as well. Yeah.
Yes. Um, and he talked about if you create this program where you eventually get to, for shorthand, I'm going to say 50-50, but you know what I mean. If you get 50-50, then if you leave that a certain amount of time, it goes back to being predominantly male because the bias doesn't just exist inside the men, it exists inside some women as well. We've been brought
Yeah.
up that way. And it's not a self-perpetuating thing. If you get to 50-50, it doesn't carry on in perpetuity because you've got women on the board or whatever. They don't automatically hire more women. So I find that really fascinating because I definitely see that, it's not just board level, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's how we start lifting each other up to make sure that we do get those, opportunities, and we don't sort of take a step back and go, "Oh no, no, you do it." And we're all guilty of it.
Yeah,
We
I
all
was
do
I
it.
was on a plane flying back from somewhere. I can't remember where or when, but I was with two other female kind of colleagues who were going to this conference. And when the pilot did the pilot announcement, the pilot was female. And the two women I was sitting next to looked at each other and went, and they're almost like freaking themselves out, but going, "We just heard a female pilot, and we're more worried than we would have been if it was a male pilot." So we started analysing this, what was going on in our heads about we were I&D professionals, if you like,
Mm.
questioning the fact that a female pilot came on, and we weren't thrilled. We were kind of more nervous. So you're right. So we have own group bias. We look at
Yeah.
other women and say, you see women, it tends to view men as being more authoritative. The deep voice, the way men speak, their height advantage, their physical prowess, seen as more competent and reliable. So yeah, women who speak softer with upticks or with modulating voices seem less confident. Therefore, you're less trustworthy. Therefore, you're not going to have faith in them. And those are those built-in biases that is really almost impossible to shake, isn't it?
There's two things there. I think I've been on a lot of unconscious bias workshops recently. It's obviously all organisations are trying to make their I&D better. They're looking for inclusion to be a real focus for them. Where I work is no exception. But what I tend to see is we get on these workshops and it very quickly becomes a man bashing session.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't, because bias exists in everyone and we need to acknowledge that. And if we don't acknowledge that, we're just perpetuating the problem. So that's one thing. But you're right about people who speak with authority and people who are a little bit softer. And from a technology perspective, I see that in a Scrum situation. So when you do software development in Scrum, you have 2-week sprints. You have a planning session up front where everybody's supposed to have input. And at the end, you have a retrospective where you talk about what went wrong and what went well and how you can do things better next time. And in that planning situation, if you're a quiet person, you don't get a word in because some of those folks are quite big and bolshy and they're very loud and they're very confident. And if you're And that's not just a female thing. If you're just generally a quiet or shy person,
Mm.
then it's really hard to be heard or be seen. And I think the same happens with retros. You can say, "Oh, I don't think this worked very well, or we didn't work very well together, and I think there was, something behind that, and I'd like to explore it and work through it for next time." If the other person is then big and loud and overbearing, then that can really be quickly be, "Well, that's you. You're very quiet. You know, you took it to heart, and you shouldn't have. We should just carry on."
Mm.
And then for you never get heard. And I think it's so important to make sure that those voices are heard. And if you've got a really good scrum master, who's the person who officiates all these things, if anybody doesn't know, um, then that's great because they can say, no, that's a really valid thing, and we need to listen and we need to work through that. But usually, if we're going to talk about bias, then the scrum masters tend to be. I see more women in that role than I see guys at the moment. So if somebody's really overbearing and talks over the top of them, how much sort of interjection do we actually get? So it becomes really difficult. I don't know what the answer is. I wish I did.
No, so they're seen as less effective, maybe not selective for the bigger projects because people
Mm,
see them as they're okay for the little stuff. We've got representation, but they really haven't got the gravitas, if you like,
yeah,
to take on the bigger projects.
yeah,
Even though they're probably more thoughtful, more empathetic, more collaborative, more inclusive themselves, they're just not seen as having that authority.
yeah. And then sometimes that person could have their own bias, in which case they will take a step back and let the
Yeah.
louder people speak up.
But we do see that. Yeah, I think we were talking about just now about how our own group bias. We're not pushing ourselves forward. The crabs in the bucket, the queen bee, the super chicken, all these kind of. We tend to peck at people and push them down for
Mm.
stealing our space or damaging our brand because I'm good and actually I don't want to give you space to become good as well.
I think Queen Bee is a real phenomenon in technology. I think, there have been so few ladies in that tech space that it's very easy to almost create yourself a special status because if you're female and loud enough, and the word I'm going to use is gobby. I'm not going to be frightened of it. Let's be. I have been there and I have done it. If you're that person and you've got that bigger voice, then it's really easy to say, this is me. I'm representing. I'm doing a thing. But as soon as somebody else comes in, if they're not as loud or if they're not as big, it's really easy to sort of say, oh, they're not doing what I'm doing. They're not helping us. How do we move it forward from there? And I think it's real hard. I think you know you sometimes see it when you do interviews and recruitment, and I think some people almost expect it. If you're a female interviewer, I think they sort of come in and they almost get a little bit more quiet if they see a female interviewer in a tech space, which is we've tried really hard in my current organisation to make sure that um, our interview panels are diverse. So there are people with different, at least trains of thought, diverse trains of thought on an interview panel. But I've been to interviews where there's been a lady and they are very, very almost over the top, getting close to aggressive because they're trying to prove a point. And you'll get through a little bit and then it almost tones down and you can have a normal human conversation. But it seems to start, well, not everybody, of course, not everybody, but I've been in situations where they seem to start very loud, very aggressive, and almost like this is my authority, this is my space, and I'm gonna, I feel like I have to do something to own it.
Mm.
But I think you can get past that bit, but it's whether people have the energy or the inclination to get past that and find the human being underneath.
Yeah, I was running some facilitated training last week, and one of the it was a mainly female cohort on this training that I was running. One of the women in this cohort was very senior in the organisation, and she presented this very tough, hard exterior and almost like scary. I
Mm,
didn't, and I over the course of the facilitation workshop, she opened up about a lot of her previous history and her background, and she became very human, very vulnerable at that point.
mm.
But there definitely seemed to be something that, because of her role, she needed to be aloof, scary, and almost dominating. And I guess that's learned behaviour by
Yeah.
fighting in a man's world.
I think, and I'm going to generalize, so you will have to forgive me, but I think if you look in tech companies, there are certain ladies who've got to a certain level of seniority, and they are basically emulating men. They're being a guy, they're not being themselves, and I don't think that helps support the wider female tech population, because I just think that it sort of shouts that the way to get ahead is to be one of the guys, and I don't think you need to do that. I mean, if I look around my current organisation, it's something that it's taken me a little while to be okay with, but there seems to be a senior leader cookie cutter. So if you're female, they seem to all have the same haircut, they seem to all wear the same dress, they all wear the same shoes, and they all have the same speech pattern. And I'm not like them. And it took me a really long time to think, oh my gosh, I'm not like these other ladies. How am I ever going to progress? It's going to be terrible. It's going to be really awful. And all of a sudden I realized I'm not like them. How amazing is that?
Yes.
But it took me a long time to figure that
Yeah.
out. It took me ages. And I'm in my 40s. And to wait that long, I don't want other women to have to wait that long. I want them to see that
Mm.
whatever they bring to the table is the best thing that they can bring. And they don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to pretend to be a
Mm.
bloke to do that.
It's really interesting you say that, because when I was going through my gender transition, I was chasing this aspiration of womanhood, what I thought, as you say, the cookie cutter, the shoes, the dress, the whatever, and I was chasing these ideals about how one should behave and to be accepted. And what I realised was, as I was running this way, the smart money was running the opposite way, saying, actually, I want to be myself. I don't want to conform. I don't need to be defined by how I look, how I sound, how I dress. And I put the brakes on and thought, hang on a minute, I'm chasing an ideal of being somebody else. I gender transition to be myself, not be somebody else. And that was the realization I had. Suddenly I think, hang on a minute, I don't want to transition to be somebody else. I want to transition to be me. So I parked myself and went, who am I? How do I want to look? How do I want to dress? And that was empowering. But not everybody is able to just whack the stop button on the escalator. They just keep going to the destination, don't they?
Yeah, I think you see it a lot, and I think there is a societal need to conform. I mean, it's all around social identity theory if you want
Mm,
to dig into some of that stuff. But it's fascinating to me, and it's very social identity theory is one of those things. It's really important that society has that, because makes us all drive the same way on the road. It means you don't stand up in a theatre and turn around the other way and start talking to random people, because society doesn't agree with that sort of thing. But it also causes us problems. If you go back to the blue and pink toys, that's what society says we do. Girls get
mm.
pink ones, boys get blue ones, and that's where we're moving forward from. It's fascinating to see how that then affects us, not just in the workplace, but in the do you become one of these cookie cutter people who have followed the thing and they've done fashion and trends and stuff? I would rather be me and be comfortable.
Mm.
But I also recognise that that's not going to work for everybody that I look after and support. So I need to make sure that if that's how they'd like to be, then I support them the best that they can. But I would love for them to understand who they are underneath, rather than trying to go for this ideal, which I don't think works anyway.
I agree. What you said earlier about some of these I&D, EDI sessions tend to end up being a white male bashing session, and we
Mm,
hear some very derogatory terms. And I get really, really passionate in the same way I think you are, that we can't be inclusive by demonizing another group. And if we're not careful,
yes.
all we end up doing is saying, you're the problem. Actually, I see people who hold the power and the privilege as being the solution. Not they may hold the keys to the problem, but they hold the keys to the solution as well. Because I look back, 100 odd years ago, women were allowed to vote by men. So we hate that. I hate that phrase. Women were allowed to vote by men, but men held the power. Men had the parliament.
Mm,
Men had the MPs. Men had to vote to allow women to vote. And it's like, it sounds so crass now, but in order to make real change, we need the people who have the keys, who have the power, who have the keys in the castle, to put the drawbridge down and start those discussions in the same way that white people have a responsibility to work on racism, anti-racism. Able-bodied people have the responsibility to create systems and processes for disabled people, etc., etc. So the people who hold the power and the privilege must take responsibility. And I think we need men in the conversation. And the number of times I go to I&D events, webinars, panels, and 99% of the people attending are women.
Yeah.
We end up in our own echo chamber. We're trying to solve the women in STEM problems, trying to solve the women's representation, trying to fix sexism. What we never do is we never have the people who can make the change in the room with us. And I remember I was not to location drop here. I was in San Francisco. I was on a panel at a conference there, and the panel was around gender equality in the workplace. And I remember looking out into the audience, 600 or 700 people in rows and rows of chairs. And I just sort of looked around and said to the audience, "Can we just have a look around us? How many men are in the room?" And it was like 5 or 6 men out of 600 women. But where are all the men? The men are learning about software and sales and other things in the other room. How do we make change? This is back to you, Nicole. How do we make change unless we get people listening who can make the change?
It's so difficult. So I, in my current organisation, I've started the Women in Tech group so that we can have a place where people don't feel so lonely. That there are other people going through the same thing that you are. And I'm asked quite frequently, "Where's the Men in Tech group?" I was like, "You are more than welcome to come and join the Women in Tech group. The Women in Tech group is not for women, and it's not for techies. So it's for people who want to support women through their technology journey, whether they're just curious or whether they are super into the code and they count sheep in binary or whatever they do when they're going to sleep." And I've been really clear that I think inclusion means everyone. You can't take somebody out of that equation. And in technology, women are a minority group. If you can't take a minority group and then solve that problem when the majority of people are not going to be involved in solving it. And it's a really, really difficult thing to do. I've heard of a lot of people who are on the public speaking circuit who will not do the women only conferences anymore. Because exactly like you say, we become an echo chamber. We talk about the problems, we talk about how things can't be solved without the support of the people who are not in the room. And we've got to do this together. I mean, when I talk about inclusion and diversity, I always put the I first, because let's include all of us and then hopefully we become more diverse. We're not diverse and then we'll include people. It doesn't work that way round. And it's allowing everybody to have a voice and standing up. The allyship piece is really key. When you see the problem, somebody needs to shout about it. And that doesn't need to be somebody of the same diverse characteristics. It needs to be everybody in the room going, "Hey, that wasn't right, don't do that." And it's a really, really tricky thing to create the psychological safety for somebody to call that out. It does start with everyone. It doesn't just start with, these are the people feeling the pain. It needs to start with everyone.
And psychological safety, one of the fundamentals of there is being allowed or feeling empowered to speak up, to give your view, and most importantly, to be listened to and respected for your view or perspective. You don't have to be agreed with, or not saying you're always right, but allowing to be able to express that so people can hear you. And that's I see a lot of people who don't want to speak up for fear of victimization, for fear of retribution, for fear of being seen as not good enough for saying something, or, "Oh, come on, everyone knows what we're talking about here. Why do you need to say something?"
Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think you get the opposite then. So I've recently, in the past couple of weeks, started a new job. And I've had at least one person go, "Oh, well, they needed to hire a woman into that space, so you've probably got it because of that." It's like, no, let me tell you how awesome I am. That's why I've got this job. But it's the mindset that comes with it that goes with that. Then we create a whole other set of problems, which is again really difficult, because I've now in the position where I need to prove how great I am at this job, because everyone assumes I've only got it because I'm female.
That's a real dilemma, and I've had conversations with other people about who've walked away from positions because they felt they got it because they were a woman. And I suppose what I said to them was, why not take it and celebrate it? Because a man will get it because he's a man. So why not a woman take it because she's a woman? It seems fair to me. And as a trans woman, I know I've been tokenized in various. I've been included because I'm trans, but I also think of all the times I've been excluded because of who I am. So why not cash in my chips where they're available and be unapologetic? Go, I'm here. This is now my space. I can occupy this. I can have my voice. I can be who I am, and speak. I can walk away and go, oh no, you're tokenizing me. I don't want to be on there. And then always grumble in the background. So now I'm going to take my opportunity
It's
and
an
make
equity
sure
thing,
that
isn't it?
I use it. And I would encourage other people to say, okay, I'm a token. I'm a token. Fine, great, yay.
Let me show
But
you what I
better
can
to
do
be
from
me
here.
than somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know it's not easy. It's not easy being the one, the only, as you said right at the beginning, that you were brought up in a world where you were not the only woman in the building who wasn't the cleaner, sort of thing. And
Yeah.
that's the sometimes we have to have a foothold. We have to say, I've got the personal character and strength to do this, so I'm going to do this. Or we have to wait for somebody else, and that person maybe 10 years later.
I remember having a conversation with somebody and they were like, what do you think about IND? And I said, well, what I think is I really don't want to be the first person to do anything. But if somebody needs to be the first to break that barrier, it's damn well going to be me. I don't want it to be me because I don't want that situation to have existed before then. But if it has to be broken, let's break it.
Excellent. I love that. I love that. I love that. So you got your dream of the future is equality, equity, representation. I
Gender
remember
equal things.
the World Economic Forum published a report around gender equity or gender equality, and they were quoting 2074 for
Oh
the
gosh.
Western world. 2074, that's, I don't know how many, what's that, 52 years' time. Can we wait 52 years? And then I thought, well, there's half it. 2046, that's still 26 years' time. Is that, hang on, it's half it again, 13 years. Is that still too long? It is, isn't it? So how
Still,
every time you look at those numbers, and that is for the Western world. If you include Middle East, Far East, and other countries that are less progressive with gender equality, we're up to 150, 200 years plus before we create this change. And what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now, we just see that's a very male-led thing that's going on. There's not enough female representation there at all. Otherwise, no doubt we wouldn't have got to where we are today in this. So
I don't know.
the
Females can be just as horrible as men.
oh yes, I know, but it's a very patriarchal,
Yes.
chest beating situation that's going on, but by a few people. And I'm not trying to be to say it's all a male problem. But how do we get tangible progress in the next 10 years that we haven't achieved in the last 70 or 80 or 100 or 200 years?
I think we need organizations, and not just commercial organizations, but educational organizations, to be braver and say, right, if we start opening people's eyes earlier, yeah, we might not be able to measure that by return on investment. We might not be able to say that this program encouraged X amount more people into STEM subjects. But I think we've got to start speculatively doing that and making it more open to everyone at an age where people can make those kinds of life choices. Or we start going to places like, so my organisation has contact centres where people phone up and they put all your details into the various systems. We go and talk to those people proactively and say, John, this isn't scary. You are already doing 90% of it because you're using these systems. This is how we bring these people through, and really embrace that diversity of thought, not just the diversity characteristics that they come with.
Hmm.
So I think those things are going to be absolutely key in the coming years to really open up the technology sector in particular. But it's really difficult because whoever puts the money in might not be the person who benefits.
Hmm.
So if we went into schools and did a huge program around helping kids learn more STEM, My engineers at the moment are helping a consulting organisation that we work with their Raspberry Pi challenge. So they send Raspberry Pis out to schools and get the kids to do inventing things, which is brilliant. They've come up with some really fascinating stuff that the industry's not fixed. So helping people do that, but you've got to recognise that, right, those kids might not grow up and then want to join that company. They might join somewhere else. They might do something completely randomly different, but still in a STEM field. So you've got to put the investment in with knowing that you might not get the return on it. And I think that's difficult for organisations to swallow.
I think I've seen organisations start to look at this academy type approach, where you're not necessarily looking to recruit or nurture into the subject through the school, through the university. What you're maybe doing is picking up people in their late teens, early 20s who've become lost, or maybe returning parents or people mid-career pivots, and saying, look, these opportunities exist. We've got a global talent shortage. We're fighting. We've got the great resignation. It's a candidate market at the moment. I think the only realistic way is for employers to breed and train their own futures. And I think the other thing you're right about is you've got to do it selflessly. You've got to recognize that you're not training necessarily just for you. You're training for society to improve the opportunity. So that social conscience, so that by having more underrepresented people from marginalized communities, women, whoever we want to talk about here, we're reducing joblessness, we're reducing homelessness, we're reducing mental health concerns, we're reducing reliance on the state. So organizations can do this as a public service altruistically, but yet still benefit. So there is still the ROI, or the return on the academy. I think you're right. I think that's the key here, is organizations have got to think not necessarily 5 years in the future, but 20 years in the future about their part in the future here.
Yeah.
So on that note, I can't believe we've been chatting for 1 hour, 1 minute and 54 seconds. It's the time has flown past. And how do people get hold of you? I'm sure people who listen to this would love to have a chat with you and hear your experiences.
They can certainly find me on LinkedIn. My surname's pretty unusual, so there's not a lot of Nicole Hardimans out there. So if they want to find me on LinkedIn, I'm really happy to chat and talk through this. This is absolutely one of my favourite subjects to talk about. So if anyone would like to do that, that would be great.
And if they're in the Wiltshire, Swindon area, are you still looking at restarting the I&D Swindon network at some point?
I think we absolutely will. We've taken a little break because one of our founders has had a lovely little girl, which is amazing. And I think everybody else got quite heavily bogged down with pandemics. We were all working from home and working extra hours and covering all those extra things. But yes, it's definitely something that we'll kick back off, and hopefully we'll get some in-person things going on, which will be amazing, because I think everybody's got Teams fatigue or Zoom fatigue, whatever you want to call it now.
Well, I'd love to volunteer to come along and be another one of your panelists or speakers one night if you ever want to invite me back.
We'll hold you to that.
Yes, excellent. So, Nicole, thank you. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure our listeners have taken a lot of that in. There's an awesome amount of content that we've just talked about, and I'm passionate about gender equality. I'm passionate about equity and equality for everybody. So, thank you for listening. Please do subscribe to keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Tell your friends and colleagues. I'm sure you have plenty of them. So please share this, the link, and make everybody aware. I've got a number of other exciting guests lined up that I'm sure you'll be equally inspired by over the next few weeks and months. And of course, if you think you can inspire people, if you haven't got imposter syndrome, you haven't got limiting beliefs, and you'd like to just put your name out there, let me know. I'd love you to be a guest. As always, I welcome any feedback and suggestions you have to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. Let me know how we can improve future shows. So finally, my name is Joanne Lockwood. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.